Here we are again. Chapter 3 of Rabindranath Tagore's The Religion of Man. This particular chapter is on page 51 for those reading at home. The Surplus in Man is the title. I don't know if there's anything I would say starting this off. We've all been through readings 1 and 2. Quan, is there anything you'd recommend we keep our minds locked into?
No, not necessarily, because I'm sure the quality of the text will provoke all kind of thoughts from our part.
Okay, cool. So can people read this okay, or should I zoom in even more?
I'm good.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, fine for me.
All right, so who would like to play the voice of Tagore today?
I'll volunteer.
Jerry, are you using your new microphone?
Yes.
Great, okay.
How's the clarity?
It's good. It's good.
Okay. All right, chapter 3, the surplus in man. There are certain verses from the Atharva Veda in which the poet discusses his idea of man, indicating some transcendental meaning that can be translated as follows. Who was it that imparted form to man, gave him majesty, movement, manifestation, and character, inspired him with wisdom, music, and dancing? When his body was raised upwards, he found also the oblique sides and all other directions in him. He who is the person, the citadel of the infinite being. And therefore the wise man knoweth this person as Brahma. Ancient they call him, and yet he is renewed even now today. In the very beginning of his career, man asserted in his bodily structure his first proclamation of freedom against the established rule of nature. At a certain bend in the path of evolution, he refused to remain a four-footed creature, and the position which he made his body to assume carried with it a permanent gesture of insubordination. For there could be no question that it was nature's own plan to provide all land-walking mammals with two pairs of legs, evenly distributed along their lengthy trunk, heavily weighted with a head at the end. This was the amicable compromise made with the earth when threatened by its conservative downward force, which extorts taxes for all movements. The fact that man gave up such an obviously sensible arrangement proves his inborn mania for repeated reforms of constitution, for pelting amendments at every resolution proposed by Providence. If we found a four-legged table stalking about upright upon two of its stumps, the remaining two foolishly dangling by its sides, we should be afraid that it was either a nightmare or some supernormal caprice of that piece of furniture, indulging in a practical joke upon the carpenter's idea of fitness. The like absurd behavior of man's anatomy encourages us to guess that he was born under the influence of some comet of contradiction that forces its eccentric path against orbits regulated by nature. And it is significant that man should persist in his foolhardiness in spite of the penalty he pays for opposing the orthodox rule of animal locomotion. He reduces by half the help of an easy balance of his muscles. He is ready to pass his infancy tottering through perilous experiments in making progress upon insufficient support, followed all through his life by liability to sudden downfalls, resulting in tragic but ludicrous consequences from which law-abiding quadrupeds are free. This was his great venture, the relinquishment of a secure position of his limbs, which he could comfortably have retained in return for humbling, salaming the all-powerful dust at every step. This capacity to stand erect has given our body its freedom of posture, making it easy for us to turn on all sides and realize ourselves at the center of things. Physically, it symbolizes the fact that while animals have, for their progress, the prolongation of a narrow line, man has the enlargement of a circle. As its center, he finds his meaning in a wide perspective and realizes himself in the magnitude of his circumference. As one freedom leads to another, man's eyesight also found a wider scope. I do not mean any enhancement of its physical power, but in many predatory animals has a better power of adjustment to light. But from the higher vantage of our physical watchtower, we have gained our view, which is not merely information about the location of things, but their interrelation and their unity. But the best means of the expression of his physical freedom gained by man in his vertical position is through the emancipation of his hands. In our bodily organization, these have attained the highest dignity for their skill, their grace, their useful activities, as well as for those that are above all uses. They are the most detached of all our limbs. Once they had their menial vocation as our carriers, but raised from their position as Shudras, they at once attained responsible status as our helpers, when, instead of keeping them underneath us, we offered them their place at our side. They revealed capacities that helped us to cross the boundaries of animal nature. This freedom of view and freedom of action have been accompanied by an analogous mental freedom in man through his imagination, which is the most distinctly human of all our faculties. It is there to help a creature who has been left unfinished by his designer, undraped, undecorated, unarmored, and without weapons, and what is worse, ridden by a mind whose energies, for the most part, are not tamed and tempered into some difficult idea of completeness upon a background which is bare. Like all artists, he has the freedom to make mistakes, to launch into desperate adventures contradicting and torturing his psychology or physiological normality. This freedom is a divine gift lent to the mortals who are untutored and undisciplined, and therefore the path of their creative progress is strewn with debris of devastation and stages of their perfection haunted by apparitions of startling deformities. But all the same, the very training of creation ever makes clear an aim which cannot be in any isolated freak of an individual mind, or in that which is only limited to the strictly necessary. Just as our eyesight enables us to include the individual fact of ourselves in the surrounding view, our imagination makes us intensely conscious of a life we must live which transcends the individual life and contradicts the biological meaning of the instinct of self-preservation.
Mm.
It works at the surplus and extending beyond the reservation plots of our daily life, builds there the guest chambers of priceless value to offer hospitality to the world spirit of man. We have such an honored right to be the host when our spirit is a free spirit not chained to the animal self. For free spirit is godly and alone can claim kinship with God. Every true freedom that we may attain in any direction broadens our path of self-realization, which is in superseding the self. The unimaginative repetition of life within a safe restriction imposed by nature may be good for the animal, but never for man, who has the responsibility to outlive his life in order to live in truth. And freedom, in its process of creation, gives rise to perpetual suggestions of something further than its obvious purpose. For freedom is for expressing the infinite. It imposes limits in its works, not to keep them in permanence, but to break them over and over again, and to reveal the endless in unending surprises. This implies a history of constant regeneration, a series of fresh beginnings and continual challenges to the old in order to reach a more and more perfect harmony with some fundamental ideal of truth. Our civilization, in the constant struggle for a great further, runs through abrupt chapters of spasmodic divergences. It nearly always begins its new ventures with a cataclysm, for its changes are not mere seasonal changes of ideas gliding through varied periods of flowers and fruit. They are surprises living in ambuscade, provoking revolutionary adjustments. They are changes in the dynasty of living ideals. The ideals that are active in consolidating their dominion with strongholds of physical and mental habits, of symbols, ceremonials, and adornments. However violent may be the revolutions happening in whatever time or country, they never completely detach themselves from a common center. They find their places in a history which is one. The civilizations evolved in India or China, Persia or Judea, Greece or Rome are like several mountain peaks having different altitude, temperature, flora, and fauna, and yet belonging to the same chain of hills. There are no absolute barriers of communication between them. Their foundation is the same, and they affect the meteorology of an atmosphere which is common to all of us. This is at the root of the meaning of the great teacher who said he would not seek his own salvation if all men were not saved. For we all belong to a divine unity from which our great-souled men have their direct inspiration. They feel it immediately in their own personality, and they proclaim in their life I am one with the supreme, with the deathless, with the perfect. Man, in his mission to create himself, tries to develop in his mind an image of his truth according to an idea which he believes to be universal, and is sure that any expression given to it will persist through all time. This is a mentality absolutely superfluous for biological existence. It represents his struggle for a life which is not limited to his body. For our physical life has its thread of unity in the memory of the past, whereas this ideal life dwells in the prospective memory of the future. In the records of past civilizations, unearthed from the closed records of dust, we find pathetic efforts to make their memories uninterrupted through the ages, like the effort of a child who sets adrift on a paper boat his dream of reaching the distant unknown. But why is this desire? Only because we feel instinctively that in our ideal life, we must touch all men and all times through the manifestation of a truth which is eternal and universal. Well, let me read that one again.
Yeah, do it.
Only because we feel instinctively that in our ideal life we must touch all men and all times through the manifestation of a truth which is eternal and universal. And in order to give expression to it, materials are gathered that are excellent and a manner of execution that has a permanent value. For we mortals must offer homage to the man of the everlasting life. In order to do so, we are expected to pay a great deal more than we need for mere living. And in the attempt, we often exhaust our very means of livelihood and even life itself. The ideal picture which a savage imagines of himself requires glaring paints and gorgeous fineries, a rowdiness in ornaments, and even grotesque deformities of overwrought extravagance. He tries to sublimate his individual self into a manifestation which he believes to have the majesty of the ideal man. He is not satisfied with what he is in his natural limitations. He irresistibly feels something beyond the evident fact of himself which only could give him worth. It is the principle of power which, according to his present mental stage, is the meaning of the universal reality whereto he belongs. And it is his pious duty to give expression to it, even at the cost of his happiness. That one I don't quite understand. If anyone else does.
Yeah, that one was a little bit of a paradox for me too, because he was just talking about the lower order person. I mean, that he dubs the savage, who is, I had understood him saying that it was a mistake for this person to try to create an ideal sense of himself adorned with ornaments, which is where they falsely get their idea of power or worth. But it's not really there, that they're actually yearning for something more universal that they don't understand, and they mistake it for material shiny things and stuff. But then he said something at the end that throws that theory upside down.
But
So,
if you read the next sentence, I think it helps. because it says that his God is nothing greater than power. So people are willing to make sacrifices to attain power.
Right. That you should have read the next sentence. Yeah, that would have made sense. Okay.
Yeah. Well, the savage is the plutocratic man.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Hobbes.
Hobbes, yeah.
Oh, no. Hobbes is the inchoate democratic man.
Oh, is he the inchoate? Oh, right, because there's the virtuous democratic man and then the lower order inchoate.
Exact.
Okay.
Exact. Because the inchoate democratic man, he wants an appearance of justice.
Yeah, not the reality of it, just the appearance.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And the plutocratic man is Callicles, that would not be ashamed to see in public that justice is the advantage of the powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Has anybody here, by the way?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, go on. Sorry.
No, go on.
I was going to say, has anybody read the Symposium lately by Plato?
If you mean by lately in the last 6 months, no.
Okay. I think that maybe that might be something we'll want to dip into after this, even maybe, because with Socrates' oration in the Symposium, when he takes his stand with the wine and does his appraisal of love. Yeah, it very much reflects a lot of these ideas that there's this yearning for the immortal, the eternal, which he's saying is needed to understand why folly exists, why even animals have their instincts developed as they do. Sorry, that was sort of a segue thing, but back to the question of the plutocratic man. Yeah, that seems to be what
yes, and it's and I'm happy that there's that line, and I rediscovered Tagore because I read it many years ago. It's true that at every stage of the epistemological development is a religious question. Okay, and he write it so clearly in that page on the savage, which is the less nice way to plutocratic man, because as he wrote very clearly, it is principle of power, which according to his present mental stage, okay, is the meaning of the universal reality whereto he belongs, and it is his pious duty gives expression to it even at the cost of his happiness. So for a true plutocratic man, wealth and power is his God, and he would be an unworthy human being to his eyes if he doesn't make all his effort to become a rich man. Okay, and I hear often that speech in our present society. Many young person would say, I have to be rich before 30 years old. I have to be a millionaire between 30 years old. And when I interact with young people, 25 and younger, I feel that it's not base avidity, it's not base greediness, it's something religious, because it is perceived as the highest possible goal.
Yeah, and like the translation we read for Plato's Gorgias, Callicles, and I think other of the members too, they referred to weakness as like a sin. You know, you deserve what's coming to you. Like the concept of justice and injustice is based off of whether you're weak or strong, and to be weak is obviously that's not the word that they used in Greek. I don't know what the word was, but it's interesting that you know it was worded that way.
Yeah, that he defined the just man, the person who is willing to sacrifice his material wealth for his conscience and for justice, is the weak man, which is akin to like vice. That weakness is vice, or love of justice is actually a vice and not a virtue in that world.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, if you see in international relations, it's a very practical lesson, because for people believing in justice and in harmony, it's always difficult to have the right, how can I say it, the right fine tuning when you deal with plutocratic man, because each step that you wouldn't be, that when you use diplomatic language or you seems to be courteous, and if you deal with plutocratic man, they wouldn't interpret necessarily that courtesy as weakness.
Mm.
And it's very difficult for people at the fourth or fifth stage understanding what is true justice and what's true discovery and inventivity. And they know perfectly that they vis-a-vis, it's not in their mental world. So to be too courteous would necessarily be interpreted as weakness, and it's I would say Tagore should be studied in diplomatic schools, because it say things in with such clarity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, should I continue? I'm going to start.
Yes, of course.
Okay. The ideal picture which a savage imagines of himself requires glaring paints and gorgeous fineries, a rowdiness in ornaments, and even grotesque deformities of overwrought extravagance. He tries to sublimate his individual self into a manifestation which he believes to have the majesty of the ideal man. He is not satisfied with what he is in his natural limitations. He irresistibly feels something beyond the evident fact of himself, which only could give him worth. It is the principle of power, which, according to his present mental stage, is the meaning of the universal reality whereto he belongs. And it is his pious duty to give expression to it, even at the cost of his happiness. In fact, through it, he becomes one with his God. For him, his God is nothing greater than power. The savage takes immense trouble and often suffers tortures in order to offer in himself a representation of power in conspicuous colors and distorted shapes, in acts of relentless cruelty and intemperate bravado of self-indulgence. Such an appearance of rude grandiosity evokes a loyal reverence in the members of his community and a fear which gives them an aesthetic satisfaction because it illuminates for them the picture of a character which, as far as they know, belongs to ideal humanity. They wish to see him not an individual, but the man in whom they all are represented. Therefore, in spite of their sufferings, they enjoy being overwhelmed by his exaggerations and dominated by a will fearfully evident, owing to its magnificent caprice in inflicting injuries. They symbolize their idea of unlimited willfulness in their gods by ascribing to them physical and moral enormities in their anatomical idiosyncrasy and virulent vindictiveness, crying for the blood of victims, in personal preferences indiscriminate in the choice of recipients and methods of rewards and punishments. In fact, these gods could never be blamed for the least wavering in their conduct, owing to any scrupulousness accompanied by the emotion of pity, so often derided as sentimentalism by virile intellects of the present day. However crude all this may be, it proves that man has a feeling that he is truly represented in something which exceeds himself. He is aware that he is not imperfect but incomplete. He knows that in himself some meaning has yet to be realized. We do not feel the wonder of it because it seems so natural to us that barbarism in man is not absolute, that its limits are like the limits of the horizon. The call is deep in his mind, the call of his own inner truth, which is beyond his direct knowledge and analytical logic. And individuals are born who have no doubt of the truth of this transcendental man. As our consciousness more and more comprehends it, new valuations are developed in us, new depths and delicacies of delight, a sober dignity of expression through elimination of tawdriness, of frenzied emotions, of all violence in shape, color, words, or behavior, of the dark mentality of Ku Klux Klanism. Each age reveals its personality as dreamer in its great expressions that carry it across surging centuries to the continental plateau of permanent human history. These expressions may not be consciously religious, but indirectly they belong to man's religion, for they are the outcome of the consciousness of the greater man in the individual men of the race. This consciousness finds its manifestation in science, philosophy, and the arts, in social ethics, in all things that carry their ultimate value in themselves. These are truly spiritual, and they should all be consciously coordinated in one great religion of man, representing his ceaseless endeavor to reach the perfect in great thoughts and deeds and dreams, in immortal symbols of art, revealing his aspiration for rising in dignity of being. I had the occasion to visit the ruins of ancient Rome, the relics of human yearning towards the immense, the sight of which teases our mind out of thought. Does it not prove that in the vision of a great Roman Empire, the creative imagination of the people rejoiced in the revelation of its transcendental humanity?
Yeah, that word's blotched out.
The idea of an empire which was not merely for opening an outlet to the pent-up pressure of overpopulation or widening its field of commercial profit, but which existed as a concrete representation of the majesty of the Roman personality, the soul of the people dreaming of a worldwide creation of its own for a fit habitation of the ideal man. It was Rome's titanic endeavor to answer the eternal question as to what man truly was as man. And any answer given in earnest falls within the realm of religion, whatever may be its character. And this answer, in its truth, belongs not only to any particular people, but to all of us. It may be that Rome did not give the most perfect answer possible when she fought for her place as a world builder of human history, but she revealed the marvelous vigor of the indomitable human spirit, which could say, greatness is happiness itself. Her empire has been sundered and shattered, but her faith in the sublimity of man still persists in one of the vast strata of human geology. And this faith was the true spirit of her religion, which had been dim in the tradition of her formal theology, merely supplying her with an emotional pastime and not with spiritual inspiration. In fact, this theology fell far below her personality, and for that reason, it went against her religion, whose mission was to reveal her humanity on the background of the eternal. Let us seek the religion of this and other people, not in their gods, but in man, who dreamed of his own infinity and majestically worked for all time, defying danger and death. Since the dim nebula of consciousness in life's world became intensified into a center of self in man, his history began to unfold its rapid chapters. For it is the history of his strenuous answers in various forms to the question rising from this conscious self of his, what am I? Man is not happy or contented as the animals are, for his happiness and his peace depend upon the truth of his answer. The animal attains his success in a physical sufficiency that satisfies his nature. When a crocodile finds no obstruction in behaving like an orthodox crocodile, he grins and grows and has no cause to complain. It is truism to say that man also must behave like a man in order to find his truth. But he is sorely puzzled and asks in bewilderment, what is it to be like a man? What am I? It is not left to the tiger to discover what is his own nature as a tiger, nor, for the matter of that, to choose a special color for his coat according to his taste. But man has taken centuries to discuss the question of his own true nature and has not yet come to a conclusion. He has been building up elaborate religions to convince himself, against his natural inclinations, of the paradox that he is not what he is, but something greater. What is significant about these efforts is the fact that in order to know himself truly, man in his religion cultivates the vision of a being who exceeds him in truth and with whom also he has his kinship. These religions differ in details and often in their moral significance, but they have a common tendency. In them, men seek their own supreme value, which they call divine, in some personality anthropomorphic in character. The mind, which is abnormally scientific, scoffs at this, but it should know that religion is not essentially cosmic or even abstract. It finds itself when it touches the Brahma in man. Otherwise, it has no justification to exist. It must be admitted that such a human element introduces into our religion a mentality that often has its danger in aberrations that are intellectually blind, morally reprehensible, and aesthetically repellent. But these are wrong answers. They distort the truth of man and, like all mistakes in sociology, in economics, or politics, they have to be fought against and overcome. Their truth has to be judged by the standard of human perfection and not by some arbitrary injunction that refuses to be confirmed by the tribunal of the human conscience. And great religions are the outcome of great revolutions in this direction, causing fundamental changes of our attitude. These religions invariably made their appearance as a protest against the earlier creeds which had been unhuman, where ritualistic observances had become more important and outer compulsions more imperious. These creeds were, as I have said before, cults of power. They had their value for us, not helping us to become perfect through truth, but to grow formidable through possessions and magic control of the deity. It's quite brutal. But possibly I am doing injustice to our ancestors. It is more likely that they worship power not merely because of its utility, but because they, in their way, recognized it as truth with which their own power had its communication and in which it found its fulfillment. They must have naturally felt that this power was the power of will behind nature, and not some impersonal insanity that unaccountably always stumbled upon correct results. For it would have been the greatest depth of imbecility on their part had they brought their homage to an abstraction, mindless, artless, and purposeless. In fact, infinitely below them in its manifestation.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, this is the way he composes his gestalts. I just find to be brilliant. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts based on what we just read. I've got a few in my mind that I'd like to share at some point.
just his discussion of the evolution of man,
Yeah.
he's really saying it's the evolution of his religion.
Yes, exactly. Maybe there's two things that I would like to discuss. Okay, at page 56, at the last paragraph, the civilizations evolved in India or China, Persia or Judea, Greece or Rome, are like several mountain peaks having different altitude, temperature, flora, and fauna, and yet belonging to the same chain of hills. And here, he's speaking in a metaphorical manner of the classical culture. Okay, because it's true that all these cultures are different, of course, but the foundation, it's the same classical culture. And he's a very poetic way to state that reality.
Mm-hmm.
And the other things too is maybe it's about all the book, okay, but at the same time, as you said, and I don't know if you will make almost the same comment, but he's building his book, his Gestalt, step by step, and he will always speak about the mind and its desire and the self and the aspiration to return to the self. Okay, at the very beginning, because often he wouldn't build his chapter like that, he wouldn't speak of the person. Um, let me find it.
Is he talking about here the citation from the Atharva Veda?
Yes, yes, and I would like to say that Sanatanam is not mentioned. Okay, it's eternal. Okay, so eternal they call him, and yet he is renewed even now today. So that's the person, because in Vedas or in Adhyatma Vidya, the person with the capital P is pure consciousness at the center of phenomenal reality. And if you remember, I think that it was in our discussion, I don't remember, maybe of LaRouche physical economy, or maybe of Planck. I was speaking of the statue of Nataraja, of the king of the dance, representing the god Vishnu, Shiva at the center with a circle of flames around. And that's the representation precisely of pure consciousness, enveloped by different layers of phenomenal reality. And here we have the same thing, but expressed by Tagore, and using the word, the person with the capital P, the Sanskrit word for that is Purusha, and Purusha means the city dweller, or the person, okay, inside the citadel of phenomenal reality. But at the center is pure awareness. And all the development of the chapter is precisely the development of that epistemological journey of the soul from the plutocrat to Rome. Okay, Rome for me, it's better than the plutocrat. Okay, because Rome wanted to maintain an appearance of justice. Okay, so Rome, the Romans for me are timocrats. Okay, either lower or higher timocrats, because they were high timocrats in Rome, of course, because it's a civilization centered on honor. Okay, it's not only for the wealth, but of course for the wealth. Romans, many of them were plutocratic men for sure, but the highest among them for me are true timocrat. Okay, because they had the pretensions to create Pax Romana. Okay, and maybe it was not the opinion of their slaves, but in their mind, they were creating a cosmos, a reality in which everyone has his place, and there is a justice. Okay, but a justice for man strong enough to fight for their pretensions. Okay, and maybe not a justice for everyone, because the Romans were very sensitive to the fact that if you can fight, it wouldn't give you honor. Okay, if I think everyone saw the movie Gladiator. It's a movie that for me is archetypical of Rome. Okay, because even if you're a slave, but if you're capable to fight in a certain way inside that society, you will be perceived as a nobleman, because precisely we go back to the fact that each culture, each person has a certain ideal corresponding to his epistemological development. If a certain young person is a plutocratic man, him it's not base greediness than to desire to be a millionaire before 30 years old. Okay, because that the highest ideal possible for him to imagine. So once again, it's always religious. And I think, I don't know if it's what last time, but when I said that each epistemological development is a step, but at the same time, a prison. Okay, a prison in the sense that if you are at that of epistemological development, you cannot imagine something higher. So all your being will strive to accomplish that ideal inside that epistemological development level, and it's religious in nature, as Tagore explained beautifully with the case of the savage, which is a less nice way to qualify the plutocratic man.
Well said. Yeah. It's very good.
And you remember that Callicles in the Republic, when he erupted in the room, and he said, justice is the advantage of the powerful. So you imagine someone quite rude and erupting in the room or the hall and shouting that justice is the advantage of the powerful. Okay, you imagine him like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of the false democratic man and the true democratic man wouldn't have enough shame inside them not to state it in a so brutal manner. They will say it between them, but they won't say it in public.
Right. Hence your categorization of Hobbes as a higher order democratic man who will promote good behavior and morality for the public, and amongst his own little coterie likely speak somewhat differently. But there's
Yes,
some
but
sort of
but
veneer of order and goodness in order to maintain a structure, and not just
exactly. And at the same time, they are sincere. Okay, I think that's the big thing that I want to say. Fake democratic man or the lower democratic man or the inchoate democratic man, when they are in their small room talking between them, they believe sincerely that it's their mission to maintain order, and it's a God-ordained mission for them. Okay, and as the savage believe that by putting tawdry ornament on him, he incarnate to a certain sense the idea of divinity. The lower democratic man truly believe religiously that it was a God-ordained mission for them to have power and to maintain order in society. The Roman senators believe in their heart in Pax Romana. It was God-ordained for them. And the more advanced fellows among them must be very uncomfortable, because he's aware that his companions are sincere in their pretensions to have a God-ordained mission.
I find this approach to be very Schillerian, Tagore's approach to the subject, especially to start with evolution in the way he is doing it, which again, if you've looked at Darwin's approach to describing the evolution of species, this approach is completely, it's another paradigm, right? And he's really looking, just like Schiller is, at the coexistence of freedom and rules and law, and how a lower order thinker will not be able to resolve the coexistence of a universe that has both freedom as well as law built into it. And he understands that both exist, and because both exist, we have to take that into our analysis of the fact of the evolution of living species and the evolution of the human species, which have certain things in common and certain things that are different, but both law and freedom express themselves in both human beings in civilizations as well as in nature, right? Lower order nature. And for him, I love this example where he both touches on the issue of the sameness and difference by getting at the four-footedness and the hands, right? And how this is very much like this American biologist. It reminded me of his thesis of evolution, James Dwight Dana, in the 19th century, who got at this mechanism of cephalization, that the unifying characteristic that transcends all of the different creations of new species is a tendency towards the nervous system centralizing itself increasingly into the brain area that gives greater use of the frontal, like the hands become increasingly a servant of the brain instead of just the medium of transport. And you get that in higher orders of mammal life, right? Like wolves, or increasingly primates will use the hands more for not just climbing around, versus alligators and stuff that came earlier. So you have that idea that he's getting at, and how human beings will walk, like, it seems absurd on the surface, but will walk as bipeds that right there, that's what Plato is also getting at in the Timaeus. We're the only species to be bipedal and to look up at the stars. That, is what Plato zeroes in on and what differentiates us. But then he's got this wonderful metaphor too of the line and the surface area, how animal species evolve as kind of like an extension of a line, whereas the human species evolves as the enlargement of a circumference of a circle, right? Which, as it enlarges, always requires a recreation, a sort of cataclysm, a revolutionary cataclysm of some sort to recreate, to overcome the old structure and to create a better structure towards an orientation, which it may never absolutely or cannot absolutely reach. But it's always yearning towards that universal truth that is guiding these, leaps in circumference. So I love that idea of both are good. You can't say animals are bad, but they're limited by functions that human beings are not limited by. And the idea of the one-dimensional and two-dimensional imagery, I think those are very, very strong, useful concepts for the mind.
Absolutely. I want to read 3 lines from page 57, which corresponds to a double of the 3 lines that made Jerry said, wow. But I'm a bit disappointed, Jerry, because you said wow just once. You should have said wow twice on the same page. So at page 57, at the end of the first paragraph, okay, they feel it immediately in their own personality, and they proclaim their life, I'm one with the supreme, with the deathless, with the perfect. Okay, so you have the word personality and you have the deathless, the perfect is the universal self. But the word that Tagore did not write, but that he said in an indirect manner, is the person capable to say, I am one with the supreme, with the deathless, perfect, is the intermediate stage of the individuality. Okay, so you have here the perfect expression of what you said. Okay, personality, individuality, not expressed directly, but indirectly by the fact that someone who is capable to say that sentence has an individuality. And finally, the center of his being, which is the deathless or universal self. And the 3 lines that Jerry said, wow, is directly linked to that. Okay, and it's on the same page, but the last 4 lines, only because we feel instinctively that in our ideal life, we must touch all man and all times through the manifesting of a truth which is eternal and universal. And precisely the people who aspire to walk that way need to create their individuality and their universal self. And when the young man of 22 said to me that he wanted to be a millionaire before 30 years old, in an inchoate manner, he begins his journey of the soul with an ideal that is not at the top, but it doesn't matter. He's 22. Maybe at 25, 7, 28, he will be a democratic man, and after that, an aristocratic man, and so on. But it's true too that in a society there is a count of the plutocratic man too. So it's not a surprise too that a young man of 22 has plutocratic idea rather than aristocratic idea. And here I think that we can have a discussion on the fact that maybe we can save time for people and have a good education so he can have aristocratic ideal at 20 rather than plutocratic ideal at 22.
Yeah, I have a question. Just it's a technicality, but what does that mean, inchoate?
Inchoate means a beginner, embryonnaire in French.
Ah, okay. What's the etymology of inchoate?
It's Greek, inchoatos, embryonnaire.
Okay. Cool. Merci.
If you have strange words in English, often it's Greek.
It's Greek to me.
Yeah. That's a powerful idea, that even people living in a wayward life are, it seems on the surface to be almost irrational when you think about how a life lived with wrong values can result and does result in the harm that that person does not only to their own soul, but also to the long-term well-being of their community and those around them, right? They may not even like necessarily live to see the consequences of the harm that they've done by a bad life lived, though they sometimes will as well. But if you're thinking purely on a genetic basis, even that seems to be against nature. If we even say on that lower level, human beings or life exists to promulgate itself, to perpetuate itself, right? That our actions are defined by our genes, which want to survive and thrive. If that's I think what mainstream even biologists will acknowledge. But if that's true, then the life of a wayward lived life, somebody lives for that Callicles lower order reason, will ultimately create greater damage and destruction to their own progeny and their own communities that will live on after them, maybe even themselves. And you're like, is that really, does that just mean the universe is irrational or human beings are thus unnatural? Or is it that we are aiming or yearning for a higher meaning beyond the limitation of our life, and we miss our bad reasoning, our bad level of self-awareness caused us to misjudge what that looks like and what that is. So we started yearning for the wrong things to give us that, to supplement that sense of the eternal that our soul yearns for. So we actually ended up accidentally living a stupid, corrupt life,
Well, that's the point too Plato makes in Gorgias, is that no person chooses to do evil, like to just do evil for the sake of evil, or to have like to be malevolent for the sake of malevolence. But there's always this idea that it's serving you, that there's it's going to benefit you, or there's a
yeah,
it's justified in like this world of Callicles again, right? Of strength. The tyrant has the most strength, therefore the tyrant is the most moral and is the most just. But like, how did that person start that journey to become a tyrant? They chose what they thought were good things for them, but they were actually sick things.
Yeah. But that it has this characteristic of this religious characteristic or a spiritual characteristic as well as, that's interesting. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, but that's religious. That's religious because the true plutocratic man, he truly believed that if he doesn't become a rich man, he would be an unworthy man.
Right.
And take it, yes. And the Romans, okay, if you are a true Roman, especially if you're in the patrician class, the ruling class, it's unconceivable that you won't be an officer in the army. You would be disowned by your father.
Right.
I wonder to what extent there's and the way it's designed, the education of these levels, there's always this belief. So the person is yearning, guided by this belief or this religion, but then it is it may be wrong, and then he may be faced with a failure, and then forced to learn something on his own without somebody telling him the answer. I don't know if that's part of it.
Oh, for sure. Look, you're at the center of all our discussions. How to give the right education to save the young man some suffering, and that at 22, rather than to have plutocratic ideal, he could have aristocratic ideal. That's the core question of the right education.
But he has, like, he will he won't understand if we tell him, but he can only understand if he is in this journey of leaping from one plateau or one platform to the next constantly.
Mhm.
Yes, but that's that the philosopher king or the aristocratic man. And here maybe it might sound a little bit grandiose or pretentious, but if you have the pretensions to give an education to someone, you're going to have to rack your brain to find some dialectical lessons or methods to bring forth what is within precisely, to bring the truth, goodness, and beauty. Because if you only succeed to bring forth beauty, he would be at least a true democratic man. And from the state true democratic man, motivated by true justice, it's not too difficult to go to the next two steps. The difficulty is to use again the lower trigram and the upper trigram. The true jump, which is truly difficult, is to go from the lower trigram to the upper trigram, because for many people who live in the lower trigram, motivated by tribal affinities and lex talionis, motivated by wealth and power, by profits, and motivated by the errands of justice, truth, goodness, beauty are just fantasies. Okay, most of those people would accuse us to be hypocrites, to say things that don't have a true reality. Okay, that is the difficult transition, because once young man is in the stage of true democratic man, it's only a question of time.
Mhm. Right.
Not all the changes are the same quality. Some there's maybe they're incremental or more difficult at first. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Implying?
Yes, because to go from, okay, let's say only from the democratic man to a plutocratic man. Okay, we laugh at the plutocratic man, but he's not laughable. Okay, most of the powerful people on earth nowadays are plutocratic men. Okay, and they are admired by most of the people on the planet because they are rich, they are wealthy, they are powerful. People listen to them. Okay, so just to go from that position of democratic man to practic man is not so easy. Okay, so the quantum leap between fake to a democratic man to the true democratic man, that is the goal of true education. And for the rest, for the logo trigram, it's more question of instruction and training. Okay, because most people who are not, because even if you are a philosophical man, you still need to be capable to make a bit of money to pay for your lodging or for your food. Okay, so it's not a question that we become completely pure spirit and we are not in our body. But for someone at the aristocratic level, for example, he wouldn't give a certain amount of energy to make some money in order to pay for his food and for his lodge house. But the most of his energy is not at that level of mind development.
Mm.
And when we say a plutocratic man, it means that the guy who went 90% of his energy at that level, okay, if not 95 or 99, that's what we mean.
Mhm.
Okay, even Socrates had to give 3, 4, 5% of his energy to the plutocratic level because he needed to eat sometimes, of course.
Mhm. Well, I was
Wasn't
thinking
he married?
about sorry, Luke, go for it.
He was married, wasn't he?
Yep.
Yeah, but he ran away from his wife. Apparently, she was not easy person.
Mm-mm. I was thinking a little bit about.
But what?
Yep.
But with all the wealthy disciples he had, I think that he was worried about his meals. Only Peter is enough to give him food every day. So I would not be too worried about him.
Do we ever know if his children were treated well? Because he asked his disciples to take care of my kids and make them good men. Do you know if there was ever any recordings of what happened?
Yeah. Yeah, Plato took good care of them.
Did he really? That's good to hear. Okay, good.
Yeah.
They
were not as distinguished as their father, but they had good life.
Good. I'm so happy you told me that. The thing that I was thinking about with this question of education, having been going, like I've been working through a certain regiment. I've been absent for the past few weeks, but for the past few years, I've been working with a painting instructor who has produced an atelier to recreate the sort of experience one would have gotten in a Renaissance atelier, going through line drawing, visual drawing, portraiture, into colors, color theory, visual representation, and it's limited. The painter is very good, but he himself struggles, and he's aware of it, with the next leap, because he's mastered the technique. And it's been incredible to watch, because many people will come in as students and they will get frustrated because they're just going through a lot of technique over many weeks and months. And they're used to the bad habits of our current society, which says, just express yourself. You don't need technique, just express yourself. That's the purpose of painting. And that's what they want to do. And that's what I was taught too when I went to art school. You didn't have to learn technique. We never learned about any of these things. We just were told to express our emotions. And that's where, you could just see how a lot of this is even rewarded in professional artists. When you go to the Museum of Modern Arts and stuff, and you could just see there's no talent, but they're doing interesting things, and the paintings are selling for millions of dollars. So it makes everybody want to do that too, right? But this instructor is telling the students, no, don't skip steps. Learn the rules of optics, learn the rules of perspective, learn the rules of chiaroscuro, light and darkness. Work on these things first, and then you could start to have the freedom when you wield these powers to then start expressing yourself in a higher way. Because what differentiates somebody like a Rembrandt from a good painter who can paint realistically, but there's none of those higher ideas one can find in Rembrandt will be there in just the good painter who just paints realism with no irony, no storytelling, nothing like that visually. So it just sort of reminded me what you were talking about with the cultivation of a student. And I think it would find itself, this expression, in every field of study, in sciences or in music or in arts. I just happen to be interacting with the arts, so that's what came to my mind, is when you go through the phases of development of line art, 1D, 2D, drawing, color, all of these things, you still hit boundary conditions. Like you can excel quite a bit, and then you sort of it gets harder at a certain point, because you're reaching a boundary condition that you have to totally change something inside of yourself to go to the next level. You can't take what you mastered at the lower level and use it to go to the higher level. It requires something new. And even like I was saying, my painting instructor, he's struggling with that himself, because he's such a master Renaissance painter on the realism level. He can paint anything and it looks beautiful. But to express a higher idea, he's still struggling, figuring out how does he emotionally tap into that place so that his mind and his heart can work together to express a higher quality of painting that he yearns for. But he's not there yet. So between these lower trigrams, higher trigrams, is very reminiscent of that.
Yes, absolutely. And we are in society favoring the lower trigram. Okay, so all the classical education has been trashed in the last 2 generations or 3 generations. because precisely that's why for most people those things are imaginary things.
Mhm. Yeah, you look at the popular music too, right? Like the rap artists who are generally promoted the most by the big record labels, and the type of image of success that they portray in their mansions with their bling and their hoes and everything else. That's where all of the money is poured into. That then shapes the aspirations of young people who idealize these characters. And a lot of the rap music, which actually has messages of philosophical merit, is relegated to obscurity. And it exists. There's actually, you know, conscious hip hop and things that have value like that, but that's not where the money is going. And yeah, there's like you said, a conscious idea of taking the ideal and bringing it down into the mud as deep as possible, so everybody strives into the mud instead of striving upwards towards, you know, the stars.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why reading Tagore is a must.
Yeah.
I'm quite thankful that I'm reading it, like that I've come to learn about him.
Me too.
It's amazing. And
Yeah.
and you can also imagine how easier it could be to understand the whole people, like billions of people of India, maybe in a new light just because of this.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's another one poet in India called Kabir. He died 500 years ago, but he's very present in the everyday Indian people, and he speak very simple. He was a weaver, I think so, and Tagore is read most of the time by the bourgeois Indians, okay, because he was more from a bourgeois environment, okay? But the equivalent for everyday, for regular people in India is Kabir. And the message is powerful. Express because if you read the Religion of Man, you will realize that there are many historical, philosophical, and intellectual references. So it's more for a bourgeois public in India, and the equivalent for the regular people in India is more Kabir.
Is there another name or first name, or is it just Kabir?
It's just Kabir, Kabir. It's a mystic and.
Could you send?
Sorry, Matthew.
Could you send a writing of high value that you find would be a good intro by Kabir as well, out by email or the
yeah, and here I want to be selfish a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I will send an explanation of a beautiful text by Kabir, but just one chapter because it's very long, by Osho. Okay, you will be absolutely delighted, I think.
Okay, cool. One thing of value that I had discovered, and I'd forgotten about this, so I guess I rediscovered it, from Tagore, is that because you know, as a poet, a lot of his poetry was turned into music, a lot of it, but he also was the author of 2 existing national anthems. So today, both India's current national anthem and Bangladesh, they're both based on Tagore's poetry. I don't know if he also wrote the music. I don't think so. Maybe he did, but he certainly, they're both based on his writings.
Yes. Well, you know that Tagore, he was born in 1861, I think. He died in 1941. So he was the apex of the British Empire. Okay. So his life was at the apex, corresponds to the apex of the British Empire. So the Indian people love him very much because even if not all of them read his papers, he was the incarnation of Indian dignity in the midst of the power of the British Empire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And his merging of these different various world cultures in the mind in a healthy, organic way is great. And the thing that I was just thinking about here, I don't know if can you guys see my highlighted section?
Yep.
It's so, I mean, it's the Platonic spirit is just so strong in this man. Because, you know, Plato would often talk about how a discovery has more of the characteristic of recollection, right? That it's not just, a discovery isn't like putting something new into you. It's more like recollecting something that was already there. So it has more of those characteristics of the mind going from a state of ignorance to a state of knowledge, but in a different direction. So recollection is something that happened in the past. So it's vectored towards the past. And you're like, aha, I forgot, but now I remember. Whereas a discovery is something that hasn't happened yet. So it's vectored towards the future. So it's like, aha, that's the discovery, right? So it's like the same quality of mental leaping, but in two different directions in time. And what Tagore just did there, where he describes going through the different universal characteristics of various cultures and the Roman ruins and what that means and everything else. Then he says, for our physical life has its thread of unity in the memory of the past. And that's the memory of like, and he was talking about the universality of different cultures, right? It's the finite infinite. And then he says, whereas the ideal life that we're aiming towards dwells in the prospective memory of the future. And I love that, because that would, for a purely logical Aristotelian, that would make no sense. It would get them very frustrated, because you're like, memory belongs for the past. You can't talk about memory for the future. But here he just did. and it's great to get into his mode of thinking, right? Because it's all one. Ultimately, this idea of past and present, it's tied to this universal, eternal, and, you know, this truth that is eternal and universal, as he says, which has expression in things that we call moments in time.
It's very paradoxical, or it's a true poet to play with these paradoxes.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And I would like to read another paragraph, 5 lines, to show that Tagore is truly a poet, okay? Because he will speak about the epistemological development, but in a very poetic manner and without using technical word, okay? It's page 62, second, okay? Since the dim nebula of consciousness in life's world became intensified into a center of self in man, his history began to unfold its rapid chapters. It is the history of his strenuous answers in various forms, the question rising from his conscious self of his, what am I? Or I would have preferred, who am I? But I understand what he means. And when I say that the young man of 22, when he wanted to become a millionaire before turning 30 years old, is religious, because if his answer to who am I is I'm a plutocratic man, that is the sacred goal of his life. And either individually or collectively, the answer to that who am I has a tremendous importance and consequences on our lives and the life of the people we know, of course.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's such a simple and great question, right? Like, what am I? And then to frame it from the standpoint of like, an animal has no problem answering that question. They're just have to have their physical needs met, and the crocodile is happy as long as there's no obstruction to him being like a crocodile. A crocodile is happy as long as he's given his material needs to be a crocodile. Crocodile food, crocodile mate, crocodile place to bathe in the sun, and you're good. But if you give a human being those same conditions, like, you know, you give them all the physical needs met, you got your food, you got your house, you got your mate, you got everything you physically want. Why will you still, you got wealth, you're like, even maybe you'll throw that in there, right? People want wealth. You're like, there's still so many cases where that doesn't satisfy your deeper meaning, your happiness. There's still a lot of unhappy people who are still like, they seem to be like, why are you unhappy? You seem to have it all made. Why are you such an unhappy person? And it's because there's like still this, we're not animals. Like, we're not limited to those things. We have this higher function, which has to also be satisfied, which is located in something the animals don't have, which is tied to this idea of the eternal, the truthful, the beautiful, and the good.
Right. And there's a tension, right, for many people right now, seeing the leadership being so wrong, and they feel it's wrong. They know it. They think, sorry, I lost my train of thought here, but there's the tension between wanting to affirm who I am, but there's a tension which you're not like they are, like the leadership. Like you live this tension of being, and not many people are at a point of like having resolved that, you know, at any one point.
Well, if the leaders are supposed to be the best of our society, which is like what our, if you just take the naive view of our society, that's sort of like the ideal, is that, you know, the leaders are the best of the people, and that's how democracy is supposed to work. And they've, you know, supposedly earned their authority to represent the people's voice as you know, and then you're like, well, our current society, when I look at the caliber of the individuals at the top of the political sort of food chain, they are nothing like I can identify with. They're very much not representative of the best. If anything, it's the opposite. And so, yeah, it can create a bit of a sense of alienation or existential nihilism, especially for younger people who don't understand the complexities of how this happened, right? And they could just become very much, well, you know, everything is a fraud, I don't care, you know, or whatever. It's easy to fall into a crisis and not come out of it, I think is what you're getting at. Whereas, well,
sorry, I just want to, while you were talking, it came back to me that the question is posed, what am I, right? And so that's going to be different for everyone, as everybody is at a different stage in their development.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's very true. But if we are in a normal society where the leadership is by democratic or aristocratic men, those democratic and aristocratic men will let the people at the autocratic or democratic stage to be on their own and to develop naturally to higher stages. Okay, it's not a problem to have different kind of people at different stages of epistemological development in a given society, if the people at the top are truly democratic or aristocratic men.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, oh, sorry, Matt, go.
Well, I don't want to cut you off.
Go ahead, Matt.
Okay, well, I was just going to say, you can
okay.
see in China, right, that currently, like, Cynthia and I were just watching the Sun Tzu video, The Life of Sun Tzu, produced by the Chinese government, or at least co-sponsored by
Chinese classics.
Yeah, from the Chinese classic series. And it's gorgeous. It's really a brilliant production. And in terms of the type of entertainment, not all entertainment has this characteristic, obviously, in China, but the fact that China can produce a lot of very high quality entertainment for people of all ages that reconnects them to the best part of their legacy of the past, which is just wonderful that can be done, because I don't see that happening at all in our Western part of the world these days. And then on the other hand,
Well,
yeah.
Go.
Well, I was going to say,
No,
on the other hand, when you
finish
actually
your
look
thought.
at the economy of China, right, like there's actually future-oriented policies with 10, 20, 30-year goals or more even for young people to look forward to being a part of when they go out into the workforce. There's a sense viscerally that they can play a role in the nation and humanity by building these large-scale, gigantic projects lifting people out of poverty. Whereas, again, here, it's a consumer society where a lot of young people are they're looking at the type of work, like job spectrum that's waiting for them. They've got shit entertainment that gets them into just like escapism on their free time. And then when they like come out of school, the best that they can hope for is to be like, somebody who makes a lot of money as a marketing executive or in the financial sectors industry, speculating or whatever. But there's not a lot of sense that you could play a participatory creative role in something bigger. So that's all I wanted to say about that idea of what you got to do to supply inspiration and the freedom to hope, and then give people the means to carry out that into reality, both on an entertainment as well as a utilitarian. Like both levels have to be satisfied at the same time,
Absolutely. I only wanted to say that when I was young, in the 70s in Montreal, Radio Canada, French equivalent of CBC, was offering quality programs. Okay, you have a classical theater from Molière, from different classical authors from France or from the UK that you can see on Radio Canada. Okay, and somehow it disappeared when I was 15 or 16. And so I witnessed the last the twilight of classical Western civilization in Montreal.
Well, it endured a little bit longer in some ways. Like I had friends who came in from the US to Montreal, and they noted that our 99.5 FM radio station used to be a classical music radio station, and they said that it's better than any classical music station that they had heard in the US until about 2010 or 2011. And then something happened where it got really stupid for a while, for a few years, and then it just sort of disappeared. So we had that for a little while. It no longer exists. You can't listen to classical music on the radio anymore.
Yeah.
We have to bring it back.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually had a thought. Sorry, I don't know if it's the right time.
No, sorry, look. No, go ahead, look. I'm sorry.
No, I never liked opera really, but I started getting interested in like Fidelio recently, and it occurred to me today or yesterday that we actually have kind of an interesting similar situation going on with Julian Assange in a prison at Belmarsh.
Right.
And his wife is going in to get married with him. It's after a series of ordeals, and I actually found a new Fidelio production I'm going to watch, but it's fascinating that there's great art finds a way to resonate. And even though you don't think it applies today, you can find little reflections everywhere.
Luke, if you ever want to write anything up, that's a great concept for a little write-up for the Rising Tide Foundation site. The Assange Fidelio combo with like a link to the Fidelio opera. that would be cool. I'd be, just thrown out there.
In my mind, like everybody has written about it already. And
I've never heard it said that way ever. What you just said, I've never heard that concept before. Just saying it. You don't have to, but I'm just saying it's pretty unique for me. Yeah.
I'll make a note.
Cool. The Christa Ludwig version of Fidelia that we found to be the best. It's from like 1962. I think you can get it for free online. It's super good. I'll try to send it to you if I can remember.
If you find it, yes, please do. I was looking everywhere.
Okay.
Matt,
Yes, sir.
on your discussion of classical radio, in Toronto here, we have one classical radio, which, I mean, occasionally they do play classical music, but their idea, it's funny, of classical, that it evolved after the classical period where we think of classical. They see it as movie scores.
Mm.
And there's a whole following around this. People will call in and request, the music from this movie or the music from that movie.
Star Wars and yeah.
Oh, yes. And Madeline and I were talking about it. On the one hand, you can say that's the degeneration of our culture, Western culture. But on the other hand, say if you were, like Juan said, a 20-year-old looking and you study music at university, what jobs are there? There's nothing out there. If you were serious about composing something, the only place where you're going to get money is composing music for movies. And that's where they go into. And
video games. There's a lot of demand for musicians in the video game sector these days.
That's the other thing. They will play music from video games on the classical music radio. Yeah. I'm pulling my hair out. I'm going bald. Listen to this stuff, but it's true.
Mm-hmm.
These scores and video games is considered classical music in today's culture, on today's classical stations. And
well, the Montreal Symphony Orchestra, not that long ago, they had a whole thing to try to attract young people, and it was a full 2-hour, they got their whole symphony, all these professional musicians who I doubt most of them were happy doing this. It was called the Best of Nintendo. And they basically had, full symphony producing Nintendo hits from Super Mario 64 and all of the things you remember when you were a kid. And that's, and newer video games too. It's just such a degeneration to really soup to that, because they know that the tastes haven't been cultivated in the young, so they're just so desperate for the new generation. Because when the older generation who frequents these types of things now, who are in their 60s and 70s and 80s, they're not going to be around forever. There's a big age gap. The young people don't care, so they're basically trying to stay alive by accommodating to the lowest common denominator, instead of trying to figure out better ways of maybe. And it's difficult, right? Because on the one hand, you have to pull people up and inspire them with better quality music. But then again, who's controlling the money? That's a big part of it too. Because a lot of the bankroll of who's funding the Montreal Symphony Orchestra, or a lot of these art houses, it's from, not so moral, multi-billionaire oligarchs who kind of want to keep this from the people, and they want to keep it as degenerate as humanly possible, unfortunately. And that's
Are you talking about the Bronfman family again?
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
Jerry, be careful. Don't mention names.
Sorry.
This is being recorded.
They do own a lot of the music industry.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's true.
But to a certain extent, it's a little bit suicide from them, I think so. Because you cannot roam over a dumb people, okay? You will pay for it at a certain time.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Because you need officers, okay? And the officers, they don't come from the children, the oligarchs, okay? They comes most of the time from average families.
Yeah.
So you need a pool of future officers.
Right. Well, you see that example now with the purges happening across the U.S. military, where anybody who is not of a certain accepted worldview is being purged completely, and they're recruiting young people with manga, anime, video games to become part of the CIA, to become part of the U.S. military, and they're just leaving the most. Oh yeah, they're getting rid of like passing high school requirements that they used to have. They used to say you have to pass high school to be in the military. They're saying no, that's discriminatory. So we're going to drop that too, and just welcome everybody. And competency tests, they're saying no, those are discriminatory. So we're going to get rid of competency tests. And who are you leaving now in the position of being the defenders, so-called, of your society? Are the least competent people who are the least able to do anything useful, just because you didn't want to offend anybody. And anybody who had competencies, they're like thrown out to the side of the road for, you know. So yeah, like you said, it's not to the advantage of the oligarchs trying to run the show to have a whole society of dumbed down, weak-minded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at the same time, and it's not me who teach you about those things, because you know those things better than me. You have two fantasies going together: dumbing down the people and creating the robots. Okay, but because somewhere in the mind of the oligarchs, they fantasize about positronic robot. Okay, you know the expression positronic robots from Isaac Asimov, meaning robots with a truly developed brain, okay, that could do many things that we human are doing. So they are dreaming of positronic robots, positron from positively charged electron, okay. So in the mind of Isaac Asimov, in his trilogy Robots and Empire, precisely Robots and Empire, there's that fantasy that the oligarch would be capable to run everything with a lot of positronic robots.
Right. Well, like you
This
said,
new military is not on the forefront. It's in like a cubicle with a computer running something, or spying on something, or pushing a button to kill someone, but it's not actually.
Well,
Or
yeah. I'm waiting for the rest of your sentence, look.
Okay, but I got I heard something. I thought you were saying something.
No. I control myself. I stopped to interrupt you.
Right, but I was just basically that was my point, that the kind of army that they are building today is not an army where people are going out in person as much as before. It is more people that are given a job of like controlling a drone, controlling some kind of weapon or some kind of system electronically. And so these people may be doing a video game on the side and their job on the other screen. And they kind of like, I imagine that's how far it can be degraded at the moment.
But that's sort of like why the like we're kind of saying the oligarchy as well, is they're just ultimately so self-destructive, because they've got these fantasies like this positron type of utopian fantasy where they could have, you know, artificial intelligence, self-thinking machines doing all of the work as perfect automatons. You know, human beings are increasingly obsolete. So in their mind, they think that they can get away with having a dumbed down workforce, dumbed down military, because in their mind, it's these like new breed of machine learning things that are going to be using logarithms to calculate and think, you know, and to do all of the work that society used to do. So they have this like ivory tower dream that they're stuck to. But then the problem is the nations of the world that want to survive periodically just go and make a public demonstration of a whole new, brand new spectrum of new discoveries and technologies on transportation and military response and hypersonic missiles and all sorts of, quantum computing things, which required creative human minds to make those discoveries, which machines couldn't do, no matter how fast they process information. They can't make those types of, like what Tagore is talking about, right? These types of nonlinear leaps. The machine can't do that. So the oligarchy itself is, they're wired to a really self-destructive formula for success, which anybody who believes in the human mind and spirit is going to be able to always flank, like we're seeing right now with in Eurasia.
Right. I mean, if it is the fact that these oligarchs have a god that they're following, or an ideal that they're pursuing, but it happens that their ideal is of a lesser quality, they actually have less power than those which have a more sublime ideal. And I guess that's the poetic justice, I guess, of if you just look with your senses, you can be in despair, but if you look within yourself, you would find that there's still hope.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I like your expression, poetic justice, because if the leaders are unworthy, meaning they are not at least democratic man or better aristocratic man, well, they wouldn't be trashed by history.
Yeah.
And it's part of the law of powers, the laws of power.
Hierarchy, or
yes,
order.
Order, exactly, because I believe in that natural order. And if leaders are not at least democratic man or aristocratic man, it's part of the natural order that they wouldn't be trashed by history.
It's funny that they say they keep emphasizing a rules-based order, but it's not order.
Well, look, those people have many fantasies. It's part of their fantasized world.
Yeah.
Well, you can see that they're just very much, they're so disconnected from this thing that Tagore has been driving towards this whole time, and Max Planck and Plato and Leibniz, all of these figures that we've been reading, they're all sort of tapping into the exact same thing, which the oligarchy is incapable of understanding because of where they've chosen to place their identity. They just can't, it's not that they don't understand it, it's that they actually fear and hate this thing that human beings can do, regardless if you come from a hereditary powerful family or a lower order family. It doesn't matter. As a human being, you can tap into that sense of yourself, which recognizes that you are part of a continuity of something which goes eternally into the future and is tied to something that is eternally into the past. And it's just a question of amplitude, right? Like, as soon as you adopt that mode, it doesn't mean your name is necessarily going to be remembered like Socrates' was, but you're tapping into a force that will have permanence on a question of amplitude at that point. It's not a question of like whether you will or not. It's just a question of like the nature of the amplitude. And sure, the people who have the big splashes, like the Leonardo da Vinci's who made like, or Benjamin Franklin's or Confucius's, they use their time really, really powerfully, and their amplitude is really high. So sure, like that's exceptional that we'll remember their names too, bonus. But it required, so many people like just resonating to that amplification to just like be a part of that reality of that continuity of the eternity of our species. That it's what was I saying? It's something which the oligarchy, I think they're ultimately afraid of their own mortality. Like the more I look into their and like Cynthia's been doing work on this amazing series of articles going through the inner belief systems of the most, some of the most powerful negative influencers of the last couple of centuries. And it becomes clearer when you read the personal writings and theories of even people like Julian or Aldous Huxley, and how they viewed their soul, or they're very much afraid of their mortality, because they've situated all of their purpose in ultimately something which is ephemeral, and they kind of know it. So yeah, I think that's what underlies a lot of their obsession with creating a transhumanist sort of, in 2050 they've got all these philosophies that they're promoting of a transhumanism where our brains can be uploaded to the cloud, which they think of as being our souls. Like we'll be able to like download our essence into like a microchip, and then like put it into a cyborg body or some like clone, or upload it into a cloud so it never decays and it's forever, kind of like their view of heaven, a perverse view of heaven, right? They get all these kooky things. So they're just really afraid of this thing that human beings are able to be immortal in that sense, where we're able to relate to our souls in that way.
No, so absolutely. That's the root answer. They are truly materialist.
In denial.
Because,
they're materialist in denial.
Yeah. Well, yes, exactly. Because what you said in the Indian scripture, since we are speaking of Tagore, of Indian philosophy, it's Manipura Chakra. Okay, Manipura Chakra is the phenomenal layer made by thoughts, concept, and images. Okay, so technologically, I think it's possible probably to store those thoughts, images, and concepts in maybe something very complex, and to transmit it over many generations, and to repair it eventually. But they condemn themselves to stay in the lower trigram. And the root precisely is that they don't believe in the upper trigram. They lost the track to the upper trigram.
That's a good point. They don't believe in it, and so they just can't get it, because it's right there, but because they don't believe it, they can't access it. They have to change their way of believing.
They're thinking if they go even lower, it's going to be higher.
Well, they are at the top of the lower trigram. Okay, so it's easy for them to have the illusion that there's nothing more beyond. But that's strange. That's very strange, because how come those upper class people can fall so low? What happened to their classical education?
Well, that was in Schiller's. That's why Schiller wrote his aesthetical letters, to try to figure out what happened. Like, why is it that in the French Revolution, the aristocracy was more deplorable than the peasants? Both did a lot of bad things, but ultimately, those who had access to culture, to science, to all of these things, who were part of the aristocracy, they were much more, you could hold them much more accountable for their sins than the peasants, who didn't. They were never given access to literacy or culture or anything, so they were more already just beholden to their stomachs being empty and to their fear and emotions. They had no way of organizing that, where the elites had that access and they chose not to use that tool that they had access to, instead of just being still slaves to their passions, their lower passions.
Well, that's my naivete, because I think that if you're in the upper class, you should have developed your mind.
Yeah, I know. Well, yeah.
because in the upper class, you always have the black sheep, of course, as in all family. Okay, but at each generation of the bourgeois, of the patrician class, you have the black sheep, but you also have the right people, at least one or two, that will maintain the dynasty. And that's one of the most mysterious phenomenon for me, that the Western elite became so materialist. Of course, you have a historical explanation and so on, but still, at core principle, I still believe that at each generation of upper class people, you will always have enough people having walked the talk to maintain that superiority if you want. But that's maybe one of my fantasy.
Plus, there's one other thing about these oligarchs. Speaking of the fantastic work that Cynthia is doing, their last couple articles, there was this one quote of Bertrand Russell she made. His book, was it A Free Man's Worship? And he said he based his philosophy on the firm foundation of unyielding despair. And that quote just hit me. It's like you dig such a deep hole from, oh, how do you get out of that? It terrified me thinking of what his mind must look like to say something like that.
Yeah.
It's like he just doesn't give a shit, Oh, scary to me. But that quote,
But that's the courageous man, right? Like that, it's the courageous man is the man who could embrace and accept the despair, the hopeless abyss that is everything, right? And if you can accept that and let go of all of your illusions of soul and heaven and like virtue and justice, just let go of all of those illusions and accept the reality of the abyss of nihilistic nothingness, then you are the strong man. You can build your structure, your identity around something durable and real, and it's, they train these kids in Cambridge and in Oxford. I've read so many people who have been through, who are like part of these grand designers of a lot of the shitty ideas that have shaped the 20th century. And you look at the experience that they talk about having received and the conclusions that it brought them to in their very special education in their Ivy Tower elite colleges or universities. They set up their experiences in a very different way from like most colleges of the world, community colleges and things. You don't get the same experiences you do if you're a Rhodes Scholar or somebody who's going to be a Cambridge apostle. You're getting a very different set of experiences because you are expected to be a manager of the system, right? You are supposed to be a guardian of the system on behalf of the hereditary elite. And so they consciously try to give them a sense of discovery of experiences, emotional, psychological, intellectual, that bring them to a deeper feeling like Bertrand Russell just experienced there or was able to express in that terrible, terrible book. That's
which one? The 1953 one?
No, earlier. The one Cynthia had in her article, it was, what was it called? Did you say
1903?
1903?
1903, A Free Man's Worship.
There you go.
She quotes from that.
Okay.
So that was
evil version of Tagore's Religion of Man.
Antithesis, yeah.
Yeah.
And well, there's an easier answer, which is biological. Maybe they are too inbred.
Maybe. But inbred, oligarchs have also broken from their mold in history. And we've got a lot of examples where they've still lived a life aspiring to virtue at different times too, right? Some, not many, but there's some.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Because etymologically, the oligarch is not a dirty word. Okay, it simply means the power of a few. Okay, it's a descriptive word. So you have to be specific what kind.
But you might be onto something. Certainly, the inbreeding does not help. It doesn't help them, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Mm.
Because I believe very much in culture and in family education. Okay. It's very difficult for me that people having that kind of wealth and power don't manage to produce at least at each generation 1 or 2 persons of value.
The power of culture. It can do a lot of bad.
But you look
Yeah.
at what happened in the States when they got rid of their industries. There's nothing tying the aristocracy to reality anymore, because they're all in the mathematics algorithms on how to win the bet on Wall Street or how to game the behaviorism of the culture, but no one's actually in the real world anymore, physically.
Exploring reality, yes. But well, when you have the financial economy, it's already too late. I mean, for a ruling class to accept the financialization of its economy, the total financialization of its economy, that ruling class already lost its mind.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to let that happen.
It's
yeah.
It's a final step. Okay, I'm not speaking of the beginning of the decadence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You'll have to go back to the past and get a time machine and change history.
Well, I think that Bertrand Russell 1903 book could be a good starting point.
Somebody should have just given Bertrand Russell a big, loving hug when he was a kid. That's probably what he really did. Just go back, get out of that time machine, give that kid a hug, saying, I love you. I love you. Bye, young man. Do well. Take this Plato book. Take this Tagore book of the future.
That movie has to be made.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll meet Tagore someday. Treat him well.
Yeah. No, that would be a fun novel.
It would be.
A
Yeah.
Uchrony novel.
Yeah. Guys, this is good. I always loved my Wednesdays. This is Cynthia she has to wake up at 5 a.m. so she had to go to bed a bit early. But yeah, this is good soul food, guys. Thank you all so much for
Yong Hong Feng. We heard you loud and clear.
Hey.
Hello.
Okay,
Good
ciao.
night.
Good night, guys.
Yeah, thank you.